Well, hi everyone. How you doing today? This is Robert Gums, better known as Bob Gums, and this is the Concerned Forum. Today we're going to deal with a subject which is quite prominent in the news of the day. Unfortunately, it's about the relationship between law enforcement and the community, and how that should be done, how that should be handled. And today, I'm fortunate that I have a gentleman who was able to squeeze enough time to drop by and give us some of his insights on a very important on this very important subject. He might not be able to be with us for the whole hour, but just him being here for whatever time he can spare, I think it's gratuitous, and we're fortunate to have him. And of course, this is my guest, Robert Ganji, and he is.
I am pleased to be here, Bob.
There
Thank
he
you.
goes. This is the man right here. Now, Bob, diving right into this, and folks, as you notice, I didn't take the time to go through my usual 5 minute spiel because this is important. It's happening now as we speak. Now, Bob, in your estimation, what is going on?
Well, I think what you're talking about specifically is the killing of
Exactly.
black men, armed, unarmed, but it seems in almost every case, if not every case, men who are not dangerous and not threatening, and police officers engaging in excessive force, overreaction, resulting in people's death. The These incidents are not new. What's new is, in many cases, they're filmed. So particularly, for example, the recent incident in Tulsa, the video clearly shows that the man is walking away from the officer, has his hands in the air, and the cop still shoots and kills him. So typically what police departments do in incidents like this, and if there's no video, there's no way to check their story, they come up with a story that attempts to make the police officer's actions justifiable. What's happened in recent years, the ones that stand out for us, I think, not just you and me, but people across the country, the two incidents in 2014, the shooting of Michael Brown in Missouri, and the killing of Eric Garner in our city, on Staten Island, our city.
Right.
The Garner incident had a video. My speculation is if that video did not exist, the police would have spun a story. Big black guy resisting arrest, being hostile, threatening, and we did what we had to do to subdue him, and unfortunately in the course of that, it resulted in a fatality. The video shows what really happened, which is the cops behaved irresponsibly, used excessive force, applied a chokehold. One of the officers, Dan Panaleo, applied a chokehold that's prohibited by the NYPD.
Right.
The man, Eric Garner, pleaded 11 times, "I can't breathe." The cops not only ignored what he was saying, they continued to apply force and pressure. And then once they had subdued him, they left him laying lifeless on the ground for minutes, an extended period before the ambulance arrived. So we know from the video that the cops had engaged in irresponsible and reckless behavior and excessive use of force that contributed directly to Eric Garner's death. Without that video, we, in all likelihood, would have read a different kind of story in the newspapers. So backing up a little bit to get to your question, when you asked what's going on, this has been going on, unfortunately, for many decades, probably goes back to the founding of police departments in the United States, which is 160, 170 years ago, in large urban areas. So the NYPD was founded in 1845, so 171 years ago. And the historical evidence is that the NYPD, which is the police department I know most about, engaged in abusive, discriminatory, racist conduct from the very beginning. And one of the purposes that the powers that be in New York City had for establishing the NYPD in 1845 was to control and contain two unruly populations, or populations that they considered to be unruly or threatening. One was the recently immigrated to the city Irish people, and the other was freed black people, because New York State had abolished slavery in 1828. So in 1845, there were freed black people living in New York City. And the police department then targeted those two groups. I mean, that's what history tells us.
Right.
So the targeting of marginalized people, the targeting of black people and brown people in particular, has been an ongoing practice of police departments since the beginning of police departments. Now, the worst kind of police conduct, which is these egregious, violent responses that the cops have that result in the death of people, particularly black and brown people, it's getting a lot more publicity and a lot more exposure because of the videos. But it's not new. So when you ask what's going on, it suggests that there's some new rash of these kind of incidents, and our judgment is what's going on is what has been happening in one form or fashion regarding the treatment of police departments, of marginalized groups, of black and brown groups, has been going on forever. What's going on now that's different and new is the exposure of it and the greater public consciousness of it beyond the black and brown community.
Okay. So as you say, this is nothing new. If anything is new, then it's the ability to actually see this type of behavior taking place.
Right.
So I was, believe it or not, I was talking to a police officer yesterday. Excuse me, last evening, and he was of the opinion that it's sad, but people need to understand that, basically running that same old line about, oh, well, it has to do with the upbringing in the home, and people need to learn to obey. And when an officer tells people to do a certain thing, then that's just what they're supposed to do, no questions asked. And I said to him, I said, well, don't you think that kind of comes off a bit narrow-minded and draconian? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, you keep talking about it begins in the home, like you're just assuming that we're talking about unruly teenagers. And I said, the thing that really worries me, well, it should always worry us. But the thing that I should say, the thing that I find so strange or so unusual is the fact that we're not talking about, teenage gangbangers or hip hop people. Both of these guys were mature, grown men over 40.
The people who were killed in North Carolina and in Oklahoma just recently, when you said both of these guys,
Yeah, and, that has nothing to do, we're not talking about upbringing. And I don't know, is it a nationwide thing with police?
Well, the attitude that was expressed by this police officer you spoke to is condescending and racist, because he's suggesting that it seems like he would be suggesting that black and brown people have not been sufficiently socialized so that they know how to behave properly. And it's a problem with their upbringing, and then that naturally leads to conflict with law enforcement, and that's the problem. Now, his analysis is, again, condescending and racist and off the mark, and even if in these two cases, or any of these cases, like the Eric Garner case, we know that initially Eric Garner resisted arrest. He didn't resist arrest by physically attacking the officers. He just held up his arms and basically was saying, "Stop bothering me about because I'm selling loose cigarettes. You should be going after real criminals." And even if someone is resisting arrest, and in the case, certainly in the case of the Tulsa incident, we don't see anybody resisting arrest. We see somebody with his hands up.
Right.
And that's not a capital crime. That is not an act that warrants in anyone. It should be in anyone's wildest imagination a response that results in a fatality. And what happens all too often is that police officers, for whatever reason, overreact, feel that their authority is challenged, and take these very harsh, obviously violent responses and shoot and kill people. We saw that in the video, I think it was sometime last year in 2015, where the victim was, again, a mature man, a guy named Walter Scott. I think that it was also in North Carolina, or it might have been South Carolina, where a cop shot him in the back when Scott was running away.
South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Right, and again, it was an older man, someone who was in no way threatening or intimidating the police officer. He was attempting to escape, but that is no call for shooting someone and killing someone. And in this case, the Walter Scott case, we saw that the officer was attempting to concoct a story, dropped a weapon next to Walter Scott's body, and all this was filmed by a passerby. And a couple days later, the video that was filmed by the passerby was made public, so we could see what the cop did and how he tried to cover it up. And then the cops who came upon that scene, and this is typically what police do, even though they knew that Scott had killed a man unnecessarily, had shot him in the back, they backed up they backed up the cop's initial story, that it was self-defense. And this is typical responses by the police department.
So, you know, it really, this whole thing really, it really knocks me down, because I recognize the need for every community, every society. You have to have some branch, some group of people whose job it is to enforce the law, not be judge and jury, but simply to keep order in any civilized society. I understand that. I don't have a problem with that. But I think that, you know, we have gotten to the point now where instead of feeling like I'm being served, like I'm being protected, I know I'm not by myself in this. More and more people. And this
you feel you have to be protected from the police.
Exactly.
Rather than look to the police for protection.
Right.
Well, we at PROP are proposing, and we plan to become more aggressive in making these proposals as we head into a mayoral election next year in 2017. Our judgment is the police officer should not be involved in enforcement of traffic rules and regulations. You don't, as a society, as a government, you don't need people with badges and guns and uniforms to be showing up when there's a stalled car in the highway, or you don't need, again, someone with a badge and a gun and handcuffs when you want to give somebody a ticket because they have a broken taillight.
Okay.
And so our proposals, and in a way our proposals are a response to the kind of incidents that just happened in Tulsa and in North Carolina, is to remove the police departments from certain areas of responsibility that they now have in New York City and in jurisdictions across the country. Because we do not need law enforcement, we do not need, again, people with heavy weaponry to be involved, for example, in traffic enforcement. We do not need police officers to be the first responders when there's a problem with a person in psychiatric crisis acting out in the community. The first responders should be mental health professionals. In New York City, the police department regulates street vendors. That could be handled by the Department of Health or the Department of Consumer Affairs. So our proposals would significantly reduce the areas of responsibility that police departments have. And appropriate areas are anti-terrorism work, the kind of work that the NYPD and other law enforcement agencies did in response to the bombings that took place recently in New York City, in Chelsea.
Right.
That's an appropriate role for a police department. Many of the other responsibilities the police department has in New York City is not appropriate for policing, and it results in unnecessary harm being done to people in the city who are not engaged in any kind of criminal activity. And there are other areas that we would point to. For example, the police department is given responsibility for maintaining safety in our public schools. That should be the responsibility of the Division of Education.
Right.
There are 5,000 school safety personnel in the New York City's public schools who are part of the NYPD's payroll, and that's more than the number of social work counselors that the school system has in schools across the city. So an inappropriate and excessive amount of resources goes to the police department and to law enforcement, and those resources should be going to other government agencies and in some cases neighborhood service groups who would provide a better response, a more efficient response, and a more benign response to some of the problems in our communities. One other point that's also critical. In New York City, the main law enforcement strategy is what is called quota-driven broken windows policing. And broken windows policing, as it's practiced, targets low-income people of color and other marginalized groups like homeless people, mentally ill people, sex workers, street vendors, who engage in innocuous activities that have been virtually decriminalized in white communities. And broken windows policing is an ineffective crime-fighting strategy, but more importantly, from a critical sense, it's a blatantly racist practice. And it's driven by a quota system. And by that we mean we're referring to a system that the NYPD has for evaluating police officers. And it's totally on the basis of punitive interactions that officers have with the community. So an officer will be judged by the department to be productive only if he or she has made a certain number of arrests, certain number of stops, given out a certain number of criminal summonses.
Well,
And then one final point with the quota system, the officer gets the notch on his or her belt as soon as he or she issues the criminal summons or makes the arrest. Even if the arrest or the summons is bogus and gets thrown out either by the prosecutor or by the judge, the officer still gets credit. So the quota system is a kind of incentive to bad policing.
Well, Bob, see, I'm a little hyped up now because you just told me something that I thought was something that was in the past. I thought that the whole quota arrest thing was done. I didn't know that.
No, it's very much in the present. And the part of the problem with it is cops engage in false arrests or giving out bogus tickets, and there's no pushback. A typical example, I heard this story today. I was getting my computer, actually trying to get it repaired, but not successfully yet. So I was in the Apple store, sitting and waiting to hear back from one of the Apple workers, and there was a young man sitting across from me. He saw my shirt, you know, the prop shirt that I'm wearing now.
Yeah.
And he started to engage me in a conversation because he had experienced an abusive conduct by police officers. Cops arrested him, and this is a young white man, so it's unusual because almost all broken windows kind of arrests occur between the cops and either African American and Latino people.
Right.
So 2 cops arrested him 12 o'clock midnight because he was carrying a pocket knife. And it was a pocket knife that was a kind of box cutter that he used at work because he was a bartender. and he used the knife to open up boxes
Yeah.
on the lookout. And the cops arrested him because he had it clipped into his pocket, and they saw the clip, and they arrested him for criminal possession of a dangerous weapon in the 4th degree. And they held him for an hour and a half. They cuffed him, held him for an hour and a half. They issued a desk appearance ticket, which means that he got a ticket that shows him what date he should show up in court for arraignment. He had 3 court appearances. While the case was open and pending, he had planned a trip to Montreal. He got stopped at the Canadian border and sent back to the United States because he had an open criminal case. And it is our judgment at Prop that the only reason cops would make that kind of absurd arrest is because they have to make their numbers. They have to make a certain number of arrests. And there's no blowback to them. They're not held accountable for making a bullshit arrest. This goes on. This case is an emblematic case. It's not an isolated example. So police officers in New York City, I know it sounds like an overstatement, they make literally hundreds of these kind of arrests every day. And usually the defendant pleads out to disorderly conduct or time served or some very low-level punishment, and because they're just interested in getting out of the courtroom, they don't really want to fight the case.
Right.
So the police officers, not only is there no consequence for their irresponsible actions, they actually get credit for making an arrest that helps fulfill their quota. And it's those kind of practices that create a culture within police departments and instill in the minds and the psyches of far too many police officers that I could do anything. I could make false arrests, I can harass people, I can lie to substantiate whatever charges I'm bringing against people, and there'll be no consequences. And then what happens, in our judgment, is it makes it more likely that these terrible incidences will happen that result in fatalities because police officers have been inured to the reality that most people face is when you do a stupid thing or when you do a bad thing, there's a consequence. But they engage in those kind of activities every day. And an attitude sets in, even if the officer is not conscious of it, that I could even handle in a situation like the Eric Garner situation, throwing a man down to the ground, applying a chokehold, and there'll be no consequence. Or I could even shoot somebody, and there'll be no consequence. And so when we attempt to come up with what kind of policy should be in place to hold police officers accountable for actions that result in fatalities, we need to start with what kind of policies in place that should put an end to the day-to-day discriminatory and abusive practices that police officers engage in.
What happened to the Civilian Review Board?
Well, the Civilian Review Board in New York City is, if you put it in the category of a watchdog, you would say it's a chihuahua. It has virtually no power. You know, it chirps a little bit, makes a little bit of noise, but it's not effective in holding police officers accountable. As you know, Bob, all the CCRB can do, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, is make a recommendation to the police department about what a penalty or a punishment should be. And it's usually a slap on the wrist anyway, you know, lose vacation pay, get docked for a couple days pay, and it's up to the police commissioner to decide whether he or she will actually apply the sanction. So what needs to happen in terms of what's a better response to the egregious incidents where there's brutality and where there's fatalities, an independent prosecutor's office, completely independent of the police department, independent of the executive branch of city government. And that prosecutor's office only job would be to investigate and to indict and bring to trial where appropriate police officers where there's an allegation of excessive force or brutality, not just where a death is a result. Any allegation of brutality and excessive use of physical force. There should be an independent office that investigates that and, again, brings to justice the officers responsible. And that, even establishing that kind of office, would send a message to cops that we now have in place within our government an effective way to monitor and to watchdog and to sanction you when you use excessive force, when you abuse people's rights.
Now, I'm not. I'm not going to try and play devil's advocate. I just can't do
Good,
that.
because what I said was so convincing that.
Yeah. Well, to a large extent, that's true. But
I hope so.
just on the other side of the fence, they would say, "Well, why would you need all of these different vehicles when you have the police department has internal affairs? Why can't they be the ones to investigate?"
Well, because it won't be an independent investigation. The police department's perception of their institutional interest is that we want to make every incident look like it's justifiable. That's what they consider to be in their institutional interest. So an investigation by an internal division of the police department is not independent and does not, that division of the police department doesn't have as its purpose to monitor and bring to justice rogue officers or officers who engage in the excessive use of force.
Okay, now the average person here in New York, they would say, "Oh, well, just like in Law and Order, the Rat Squad, as they call them on Law and Order," and they'll say, "Well, our job is to get rid of violent, bad cops." So you're saying they're not doing their job in real life, in reality.
Exactly. As an example, for example, I'm obviously repeating my words unnecessarily. The cop in New York City who in recent years has engaged in the most notorious violent behavior that resulted in somebody's death was Dan Pantaleo, who is the officer who applied the chokehold on film. So there's no way of denying that he used the chokehold. Chokehold is prohibited by the NYPD's guidelines. The coroner's report came out, and the finding was it contributed directly to Eric Garner's death. In addition, he and the other police officers ignored Garner saying 11 times, "I can't breathe," left him laying lifeless on the ground. Dan Pantaleo is still working for the NYPD.
Yeah,
He's still drawing his salary, and in fact, he's on modified duty, but he was able to earn overtime, and in one recent year, he made over $119,000. Now, not only is he not being held accountable, not only is he not being indicted and sent to prison for engaging in a violent act that resulted in somebody's death, he is still being paid by the police department. Bratton and de Blasio did not take the steps that they should have taken, which was to fire him the next day and to fire all the police officers who engaged in the piling on of Eric Garner. All of them were irresponsible, used excessive force, embarrassed New York City, embarrassed the police department that they work for, and they didn't deserve to keep their badge, keep their guns, and still to be a police officer.
My God.
But the city government did not take that step, and that is, again, a very dramatic example of the lack of accountability as applied to or not applied to police officers who engage in misconduct or brutal behavior.
Okay, I got another hot one for you. And it's like I try to explain to people, whether you like it or not, politics is an integral part of our life, whether we like it or not. And every citizen, they owe it to their country and to themselves to know what the hell is going on. What do I mean by bringing that in? Well, I'm a member of the Three Park Democrats, and one of the things that we did, we helped to get Mayor de Blasio elected. I busted my hump, okay, literally, to work the phones, to hand out flyers,
Mm.
the whole gamut of
Right.
political volunteer work. And I did it. One of the reasons I did it was because I said, this is the guy that's going to bring peace between the police force and the community of, especially the community of color here in the city, and bring us all together. And I don't know what happened. He seemed like he was about his business in that regard when we first started out, but it started to look more and more like I don't know. It's like this gentleman that's the head of the police union, Lynch. Um, is the mayor afraid to tackle Sergeant Lynch? I mean, what is it?
We can only speculate about why de Blasio has embraced broken windows, why he has done nothing to modify broken windows. He's done nothing to put an end to the quota system. A lot of people, including us at Prop, were encouraged, as you're suggesting, by de Blasio's election. Part of his platform was to not only reduce the use of stop and frisk, but to institute other reforms to police practices that would eliminate the racial bias in policing. And he is completely violated those pledges and those promises. He has gone into the tank on these issues. He has embraced broken windows policing, and broken windows policing by any measurement, including the numbers produced by the police department, show the stark racial bias associated with broken windows policing. Broken windows policing is blatantly racist policing.
Yeah.
And de Blasio has supported it. He's embraced it. Our judgment is he's made a political judgment that he's made a political calculation that he needs to embrace broken windows policing and this sort of tough form of policing, while at the same time engaging in some kind of pretense that they are modifying broken windows policing, and that he has to do that for political reasons. He is, I think, very politically wary of being thought of as being soft on crime, and he appointed Bratton. Bratton was his first major appointment.
Right.
Shortly after he was elected. And Bratton was the only high-level appointment he made where the person he appointed was not a known reformer in their previous work. And Bratton, his legacy is a broken windows legacy. Bratton defends broken windows with great determination and great passion. And de Blasio, again, made a political calculation that he had to line up with Bratton on this issue as a way of protecting his right flank from criticism that he was going soft on crime, and that might result in an uptick in the crime rate in New York City. So de Blasio has made a political calculation to support broken windows policing, even though, again, by any measurement and all evidence shows that this is blatantly racist policing that, contrary to his claims that he wanted to address social and economic inequities in the city, that he wanted to rewrite the Tale of Two Cities narrative that applies to life in the city. He is supporting broken windows policing, which is probably the single most powerful government practice and policy that drives the Tale of Two Cities, that reinforces those social and economic inequities.
Could you explain to the folks, just what it is about the broken windows philosophy that makes it so detrimental for communities of color?
Well, the theory is that if a city government, through its police department, concentrates on preventing or punishing low-level acts of civil disorder, like graffiti or begging or fare evasion on the subway or carrying an open alcohol container, by containing and confronting those incidences and punishing those incidents, you will make a significant headway in reducing serious crime, like assaults and armed robberies, rape, and murders. It's a theory that's never been proven. No academic study has ever looked at broken windows policing and reached the conclusion that it is an effective crime-fighting strategy. whether or not you think it's an effective crime-fighting strategy, it is still an objectionable policy and practice because it is, by any measurement, I'm repeating what I said before, it is blatantly racist. So, for example, the police department's own numbers show that 85 to 95% of the misdemeanor arrests in New York City involve the police and New Yorkers of color.
Okay.
One particular arrest category is compelling evidence about racist policing. All the research reports that white people use and sell marijuana in equal and greater proportion,
Right.
or greater proportion than African American and Latino people.
Okay.
Yet in New York City, last year in 2015, the NYPD made over 20,000 arrests for the sale or possession of small amounts of marijuana. Again, these are the department's own numbers. 92.5% of those arrests involve New Yorkers of color. 92.5%. Another arrest category, it's called theft of service, but it's basically arresting people for fare evasion. And people attempt to jump the turnstile not for the thrill of it, but because the subway fare is actually a financial burden for them.
Yeah.
So this is arresting people for fare evasion is the most pointed step that the NYPD takes in criminalizing poverty. Last year, there were over 29,000 arrests for theft of service or fare evasion. It was the most numerous category of arrests that the NYPD conducted last year. Over 90% New Yorkers of color. 92%, I think, was the exact figure. What the New York City should be doing is recognizing, first of all, that everybody, particularly low-income people, need to use public transportation in order to make a decent life for themselves in the city, to get to work, to get the job training, to get the job interviews, to get to school. You need to use public transportation. And what the arrest policies and the summoning policies of the NYPD, the effect they have is to punish poor people who are attempting to use the subways or the buses to get to meetings that they have to get to. And what the city should be doing is, instead of using law enforcement as a response, it should be taking steps to help poor people use the subways and buses. It should engage in a policy of either reduced fares for poor people, or free public transportation for poor people. We already provide free public transportation for students and other classes of people. Reduced fare for senior citizens. That should be extended to low-income people. Instead of having a law enforcement response, have a public policy response that actually works to benefit people in the city instead of to apply punishment to people in the city, and instead of to take steps that criminalize poverty.
Now, you talk about criminalizing poverty. How does this tie in, if you think it does, police brutality, the whole fare evasion charges, the fact that we actually in this city, I don't care what any politician might say, we have a housing emergency. What is it, over 85,000 children in the public schools in this city are homeless kids.
I don't know the numbers, but they're very, very high, yes.
Yeah, how does all that, do you see that being tied together, basically?
Yeah, because we all too often we have a law enforcement response to activities that are associated with poverty, or associated with homelessness, or associated with mental instability. And the responses should be benign responses and social service responses. So, for example, police on a fairly regular basis will arrest people who are begging on the subway. And often the people engaged in begging on the subway are homeless people, or people who have mental health issues. The response should not be a police response. Should be, how do we help this person? How do we help this person stabilize his or her life? How do we help provide housing for this person? And that may, some people might say, well, if you decide to provide those kind of services for people, where's the money going to come from? Well,
Yeah.
where one place the money can come from is from the police department, because it's expensive to police, arrest, and give summonses to poor people who are engaged in fare evasion or begging or walking between two subway cars or having their foot up on a subway seat. All actions that will sometimes lead or trigger a police response and an arrest. The city is spending millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on making misdemeanor arrests every year,
Right.
and putting people through the criminal justice system in the courts and sometimes into jail. And instead, the response should be a social service response, a public service response, helping people, and that response would be more benign, would be more humane, and more effective in dealing with the problem, and would eliminate the harshness and the heavy-handedness that characterizes so much of what policing does, and the injustices that policing does and the criminal justice system applies.
Now, how do you feel? And I'm talking about the police union for a reason. Because it seems that every time someone like yourself, for example, points, goes to the media, to the public, and says, hey, we have a problem here. Let's take a look at this problem. The police union, I believe that I was correct earlier when I said Sergeant Lynch, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Patrick Lynch is
Patrick
the head
Lynch,
of the.
right.
It's the official name is the Patrolman Benevolence Association. The acronym is PBA,
right.
and that's the police union. Yes.
Yeah, they will immediately get on their war horse and say, hey, you're attacking the police. Stop attacking the police. We're the ones responsible for the lower crime rates that we have here in New York.
Right.
We're the ones that created that environment.
Right.
And when you say something, when you point out a problem, you yourself basically are made to feel like you're against the city because you're trying to correct the situation.
Well, to me, that's all that's misguided, and it's disingenuous. And we're not against the police. We're against systems that involve discriminatory and abusive policing. We know that there are many police officers, if they had their way and felt that they could speak out without retaliation, would oppose the quota system, would oppose broken windows, because that kind of police is more likely to put them in harm's way.
Yeah.
It's more likely to create antagonism and distrust in particularly low-income communities of color, and make police officers' job more difficult and more dangerous.
Right.
So we do not accept the claims, and we are aware of the criticism, that we are anti-police, or we are anti-the city, or we are anti-American. The way we see it is we're the true patriots. The founding principles of America include presumption of innocence, include equal justice and equal opportunity. And the way the criminal justice system operates makes a mockery of those founding principles. And African American and Latino people who live in New York City are all too painfully aware that America and New York City does not adhere to its own founding principles. And what we, in calling for the changes we're calling for, we are attempting, one way to think about what we're doing is we're attempting to bring America home. We're attempting to create the kind of changes that are needed so America is in fact adhering and living up to and fulfilling its original promises for equal justice, for equal opportunity, for everybody in our society, including people of color, including people who all too often have been marginalized, again, like homeless people, mentally ill people, transgender people, sex workers, street vendors. Everyone in the society should be embraced. Everyone in the society should be treated fairly and justly. And we have a criminal justice system right now, starting with policing, that violates those principles every day, multiple times. And that's what we're addressing.
So you guys, you're not the enemy of the cop on the beat.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I know this, and this is just not, dealing, speaking about New York City, but I know there was the National Police Union. They did something that was very political, from what I understand. They endorsed Donald Trump for president.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah. Don't you feel, and this is something I've been wanting to get out and get an answer to, whoever we have sitting in the White House, don't they kind of set the tone, even as far down as to the local policing? In other words,
I think I think there are a number of factors that set the tone, and one of them is certainly the kind of comments and leadership that a president provides. And Donald Trump, as president, would set back, clearly, given his pronouncements, given his public positions about race, about law enforcement, would set back the movement to promote fundamental change in policing, to eliminate racist policing.
Now,
by the way, I have to leave fairly soon,
Yeah.
Bob. So,
well, we're just about ready to wrap it up.
okay.
I still have about 10 minutes to go, but I know that you have to get going.
Yeah, I have another meeting that I have to make in town.
Listen, we want to thank you for sparing the time to come on.
Well, this is, as you can probably tell, I am happy and eager to talk about these matters and to use this forum as a way to educate people about these issues and to expose the problems, and also to show people we have very specific proposals to address the problem. We're not just putting forth what we're against, we're putting forth steps, programs, policies that the city leadership should take to, for once and for all, end racist policing and abusive policing in the city.
If I ask you to tell our folks out there that you'd be willing to come back on the show in the next month or so, would that be okay?
Anytime you invite me, I will make an effort to work my schedule so I could be here. Absolutely, Bob.
We're going to hold you to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right,
If you
again,
could just
take care.
hook yourself there.
I'll do my best to do that.
Okay.
Okay. And good luck. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
And
Take care.
Shake your hand again.
All right.
And I'll be back.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Excellent. Well, there you have it, folks. That's Bob Ganji, and he is in charge of the organization called PROP. And this is an organization that's devoted to trying to have a more positive interaction between the community and the police department. Now, we all know what's been going on, unfortunately. And I'm quite sure most folks out there, like myself, we're pretty depressed about this. What I want to say now in the short time that we have left is essentially this. We're going to make it, okay? We are going to make it. And what I mean by that is, if you've been listening to this election campaign for the last 12 months, I'm sure that you probably have heard enough negativity to power a rocket ship as big as the Empire State Building going to hell, okay? But I just want to tell you that it ain't like that, folks. We've had a lot of challenges in this country. And the only time that we have dropped the ball or we have tripped ourselves up is when we don't stand up and face these challenges. Sometimes facing challenges can be pretty hard. It's kind of, like life itself. It's like growing up from a child to an adult. Some of that's not easy. Sometimes it gets damn hard. But you learn as you go along that when you stand up and you face things and you work them out, things come out so much better most of the time. And that's what we have to recognize here. This is our country. And at this point in time, we have to start asking ourselves who we are as individuals and what type of country do we want to be. Now, I tell you, as long as I have watched and participated in politics, I never saw a candidate for president of the United States that thinks the best cure for America is to build a wall. I find that so strange. The United States of America has a wall. Walls serve a couple of purposes. They serve to keep people in. Remember the Iron Curtain? Well, that's real. That was real. I saw that. The first time I was in the service, that's what I was. I was a border troop. And we guarded the border between East and West Germany and Czechoslovakia, all the way up to the North Sea. And the purpose of that wall was to keep people in. Now we're talking about here in America building a wall to keep people out. And quite frankly, I find that to be something so un-American, so medieval, something right out of the Dark Ages. And I think that what we have to do as Americans, this has to be something that we reject, pure and simple. The violence going on now between certain, our communities, and because of certain actions that have taken place, resulting in the needless death of some African American men, that has to come to a halt. Because, see, and this is what also really pains me. Like I said to Bob Ganji, trying to express myself to this police officer I was speaking with, they've always, in the past, they've always tried to put the blame on, home life, bad home life, no structure in the home, kids not learning any discipline, they don't know how to follow orders. Well, the thing about those, what I call now excuses, is that they don't really make any sense. These folks that have been killed, you're not talking about some 17, 19-year-old or even 20-year-old that, just wouldn't bend the knee. We're talking about mature adult men with children, families, jobs, going to school, It could have been you, could have been me. And they're dead. They're dead. Not one of these guys did anything that involved someone being hurt, someone being robbed, someone being beaten up. In other words, they weren't doing anything that should have cost them their life. That's wrong. That's damn wrong. And see, here goes the point that needs to be made. And that point is, we have to deal with that. We need to find out why that happened. We need to understand why is it when someone sees a black guy, especially if he's over 5'10", let's say, then all of a sudden you're not just seeing one guy that happens to be black. You're looking at King Kong. You know, in one of the tapes, the guys in the chopper, in the Oklahoma incident in Tulsa, can be heard saying something to the effect relating to the guy's size. Oh, well, you know, he's a big one. So, you know, he's a big guy. So, you know, along those lines. And see, that's a large part of the problem in this country. I think you have too many folks in America. They don't want to see black men as their fellow citizens. They don't want to see black women as their fellow citizens. They don't want to see black people as just another fellow citizen. That is the major problem. And we need to go ahead and face that and deal with it. And these black surrogates, for example, Donald Trump, and I can't think of his name, that black sheriff out there in Milwaukee. These people who make excuses for the racism, they are not helping. As a matter of fact, they are doing a very huge disservice to all Americans. Because just like Martin Luther King said, injustice for one, quite literally, is injustice for all, because eventually it comes back to bite you on the butt. Just as when you had slavery and then Jim Crow throughout the South. What wound up happening, and Bill Clinton put it correctly, you drag yourself down. Let's think about this, my fellow citizens. Let's think about this as we go along. Let's try to work together. God bless, and see you next week.